Hello and welcome to another episode of Costa Rica Crypto, where today I'm sitting down with one of my favorites, Mr. Thomas Cox.
Hey there.
Hey Thomas, it's a pleasure to have you on again. I always love having the opportunity to talk to you. For anybody who might be living under a rock, do you want to just kind of describe who you are, what's
Sure.
been so far?
Yeah, like why would anybody interview me on a show like yours? And I'm guessing, you'll have to correct me, it's because of my activities in the EOS ecosystem, EOS being a smart contract platform and cryptocurrency. Number 5 in the coin market cap rankings, I believe, as of this particular moment. And yeah, my role in the EOS ecosystem was as a Block.one employee to work on the governance setup and to socialize it, talk to people about it, get feedback on it, and to create an initial set of governance documents and governance settings, smart contracts, and so on, that would be good enough out of the box that a person could spin up a public mainnet and it ought to work. And I don't think I failed too badly because we have a mainnet and it kind of mostly works. In the constitution that I was in charge of working on was one that I built by looking at Dan Larimer's extensive writing on the subject, as well as the input of a bunch of lawyers and internal advisors like Ian Grigg, the inventor of the Ricardian contract, and a bunch of other folks. So through a very interesting committee process that also included a lot of community input, we created the Constitution, and I was the face of explaining that, describing it to people, and also describing the rest of the governance layer, how arbitration might work, how token holders are kind of like the legislative branch in a way. To the extent we are a self-governing body, we have 3 legs to the stool of governance, legislature of token holders who elect block producers and, in theory, vote via referendum to set policy. We don't have a referendum contract at the moment, although there's some people in the final stages of testing one. It sounds pretty cool stuff. So you get the legislature of token holders, the executive branch of the block producers, and then this sort of quasi-judicial function of how do you apply the rules to specific cases, and that's handled by arbitration. And so that was my focus for the better part of 9 months, from September 2017 to the end of June 2018, which was my duration of employment at Block.one as employee number 3. I think I might have said employee 2 at one point. That's not correct. Employee number 3. Dan Larimer was number 1. David Moss was number 2. I was number 3 of the U.S. Organization.
It's a pretty impressive resume. One of the reasons why I love to sit down and talk with you. Also, the fact that I haven't.
Well, yeah, did a bunch of database work before that, and traditional databases, Oracle, and things like that.
For sure.
So that's kind of the background, and then because of the work I'd been very publicly shopping governance ideas around, I became a known face and a known voice in the ecosystem, and left Block.one because governance through Block.one was over. It was time for the community to own that. And David Moss and I now work together at a stealth startup called Strong Block, which I can't tell you about. And I was recruited by a guy named Brock Pierce, who helped start Block.one back when it was starting. Brock recruited me to be the interim executive director of the EOS Alliance, which is the analog to the Ethereum Foundation or the Bitcoin Foundation. It's this sort of nonprofit focal point entity that helps the community to talk to itself and achieve consensus. That's how we see it. So I've got a full-time job and a part-time job, and they're all EOS focused. So I'm pretty much all EOS all the time.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Strong Block, which is something that I've had my eyes on. I keep creeping your website every once in a while.
Can't say a thing.
I know you can. It is, but it kind of ties into what we're here to talk about today. And you kind of coined the term sister chain, right? Is that kind of...
Yeah, I tried at one point, and actually took some further notes after the last time I talked about it. You'll be the first person to hear this. So I was trying to figure out, like, what we need a technical language to talk about, quote unquote side chains, because people throw the word side chain out all the time. But what's it really mean? And so, this is a fork of that. Like, what does that even mean? Do they share the same Genesis block? Do they share a version of the same Genesis block? Like Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash are forks because at some point the database itself was like replicated and they went off in a new direction and put in different transactions and called it something different. But if you had a balance earlier on, now you've got two balances in these two competing versions of reality. Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash. So that's a data, a fork of the database, if you will, a fork of a mainnet. But if you take a copy of the EOS code from the publicly available MIT licensed open source software and spin up a brand new chain of your own Genesis block, what do you call that? You can't really call it a fork, because if that implies that you share data, that at some past block height you had the same exact data as somebody else. So maybe fork isn't quite the right word. What is? And then there's the idea of, if the main net is too crowded or you've got too much work to do, you can spin up a little chain over here off to one side and then synchronize it back to the main net periodically. What do you call that relationship? And I think we somewhat lack the language, so I made some stuff up, which is like typical for me. I'll make some stuff up, right? And then I'll find out that somebody else has got there's like a PhD program at some university where they already have a technical language, and I'm an idiot. Fortunately, I don't much care. I'm kind of used to being an idiot. So the language I came up with was that it's a sister chain if it runs, off to one side from a main net, and they didn't have an identical block height at some point where they had all the same data, and now they've that would be a fork if they shared data in the past. So something like Telos, which shares kind of the same Genesis block, but they capped the holdings, so all the really fat wallets got skinny, dramatically reduced the disparity in power between big holders and small holders as a more democratized mainnet. That was their plan. Interesting thinking, right? Same software, same smart contract language, same virtual machine. Slightly different governance, right? Slightly different constitution, I imagine. I haven't looked, I'm sorry. But because they are fully independent. They don't have to synchronize anything to anybody. They don't share data at some prior, moment in time other than the Genesis block, which was their choice to do. You could call them a fork. I would tend to call them a sister chain. Sister meaning they're siblings, meaning they're co-equal. If you have one of these little side chains where you have to synchronize up to the main net in order to remain valid, and you're doing a bunch of little transactions and spinning away real fast down here, but then you synchronize your state back up to the real world, if you will. That's more of a daughter chain. So it's subordinate, it's smaller than, and it's tied relationally to a main net or to a larger one. And so, and a diagram would probably help rather than me waving my hands, but that's what I got. And some of the questions I have are things like, are you using the same software? Are you using the same underlying database with the same rows in it, the same facts that at some point in history were shared and identical? Derivative data, is there a requirement to synchronize periodically, as opposed to inter-blockchain communication where you might choose to send messages back and forth, but it's not some mandatory thing where the whole structure, the whole point of this chain is to be this, that it's going to be subordinate to a mainnet and it's going to synchronize to the mainnet every 30 minutes or something. Right? Subordinate, daughter chain, fully independent, standalone, sister. And if they share past data and then they've diverged, that's a fork to me. And other people out there in crypto who've been using the word fork since 2009 or something are raging at the screen. I was like, that's not correct. It's I'm sorry. Educate me. But that's what I got.
I like it. I think you need to have some definitions for exactly that reason. I know there's a lot of questions out there.
Well, we live in a fast-moving technical space where there aren't clear definitions of certain concepts yet, and I promise you, we will not advance as fast in the absence of a technical language as we will in the presence of a technical language, where specific words have specific, clear, agreed, shared meanings. There's one of my favorite lean authors. I'm going to find the book here somewhere. No, I won't. I'll look for it. I won't find it. Wrote an entire book on outstanding organizations, and the first chapter is that outstanding organizations take the time to achieve very high levels of clarity. And clarity was the entire first chapter, and it was such a popular chapter that she wrote her next book on just that chapter and blew it up into book size, because people struggle with clarity. You'll go to an organization and they'll talk about a green slip and a routing slip and an E5 form, and they're all the same thing. Or are they? They're like creating chaos for themselves by not having a shared language. And there's enough chaos in the world. You don't need to generate more at home. So, and yet we see that happen in organizations all the time. And this consultant I'm thinking of, whose name will pop into my head in a minute, like a big part of her practice is to go in and just notice the incredible sloppiness and how dirty the lexicon is and how imprecise the language is, and how like 3 terms will be used for the same object, and sometimes the same term will be used for multiple different objects. And it's amazing any work gets done correctly in an environment like that. But the work of cleaning things up and becoming more precise and more accurate and more clear, people just don't want to do it because they don't want to be the jerk, or they don't want to because it's a lot of effort, or what have you. There's a philosopher once who said that things are unclear to an extent you can scarcely realize until you start trying to clarify them. And that certainly seems true to me.
So for all intents and purposes, I think today we're going to use the term sister chain for exactly that.
So Telos and Worbli are 2 sister chains of the EOS mainnet. Would be, to me, that feels accurate by the definitions we're using.
That's good. It'd be good to see some documentation on that. Have you created anything?
I will mention it to a friend of mine who is a compulsive creator of diagrams, and I'll see if I can lure him into doing the work. Otherwise, I'll just sketch it out myself.
Yeah, so today I've kind of commandeered you a little bit to speak about one of these sister chains in particular, and that is ultimately Worbli. But you spoke kind of about the fact that you have strong block coming out. However, you've given me very little to work with, which is more intriguing.
Nor shall I.
I believe it, but I'll definitely be keeping my eyes on that. But I guess the necessity of sister chains, so to speak, inside of the ecosystem, clearly was built for a reason.
Yeah, I think at one point Dan Larimer expressed to me sort of surprised that there weren't more forks more quickly, that there weren't more side chains, sister chains, derivative project. Like Ono is this China-based social media platform built on a copy of the EOS software with their very own Genesis block and their own applications that they've created. That's brilliant. Why are there not dozens of those? And I suspect there are dozens coming. And Worbli certainly will be one. Telos already exists. There's probably another one I'm not thinking of, and then there's Ono that I remember. And so we've got at least 3 sizable, fully autonomous sister chains out here that I consider part of the larger EOS ecosystem. Right? They share an operating system. Smart contracts on one can probably be ported pretty easily to the other, since they're going to share a virtual machine or a virtual machine specification. They're going to have similar philosophies of how to operate, the existence of a constitution, for instance, some stance or other around arbitration. What that does is it means as a person in an ecosystem, if you're a developer, your opportunities just expanded. As a user, your people competing to do things for you and give you apps has just gone up. So I think it's really lovely and wonderful. I would hate to even contemplate a world where there was just one EOS mainnet and nothing else. That's a very sterile and artificially limited, parallel universe, and I wouldn't want to live there.
Why do we need these chains? Why?
Well, see, a mainnet can only do certain things, right? It's got a certain set of governance rules. It's got a certain way of evolving, a certain speed at which it moves. It's got a certain distribution of tokens, which means that the resources will get used by the people who have more tokens. And it runs on the specific block producers that it runs on based on, in the mainnet case, how the token holders vote. And if you've got a use case that doesn't fit mainnet, you've got to have another option, or else your use case doesn't happen. So Ono, for instance, their vision, as I understand it, was to have a social media platform in China for a Chinese audience, built on EOS, and nothing else would run. And that is a great use case for a side chain, a sister chain. You take advantage of the software that's been written, but you don't have to use the same block producers everybody else uses. You can stick them all in China. You can do your own distribution of tokens, and you can serve your users using the software without having to make the compromises you'd otherwise have to make if you're trying to shoehorn it into a mainnet.
I know you've kind of, you spent some time with Dominic, and you.
Yeah, Dominic Thomas. I've met him, of course, in Telegram channels, and immediately knew that he was smart and a little prickly, which I take to be a good sign, because you can't be an effective visionary for a product if you're not able to defend the boundaries of your vision. That requires a certain willingness to be unreasonable, if you will, or a willingness to be less than fully accommodating. Really sweet, nice people don't make good product visionaries. There's a certain softness that comes with being very accommodating. You gotta, once you got the vision, you gotta hold to it, thick or thin. I think Dominic does that. And the Worbli vision, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert on Worbli, is to have a mainnet-like ecosystem, but really focused on the unique needs of financial institutions. So you can't have just anybody be a block producer. You can't have just anybody be a token holder. You can't have just any old code running on it. And so those unique use case constraints would tell you, gosh, I need to make my own chain. I need to vet the block producers, maybe get to know them as individuals, put them under a special contract, do some special vetting, come up with a different Genesis block, and who knows what else. Only let people onto the chain who've gone through KYC, which is the know your customer requirement that banks have to comply with. And so, knowing that the financial use case is very exacting and much more restrictive, trying to fit that into mainnet, that seems undoable to me, or the doing of it would be extremely challenging and probably not worth it. And I don't think there's anything in the Worbli use case that requires it to be in regular contact with things on mainnet. And you can be in sporadic contact with other chains through inter-blockchain communication, IBC. So it made a lot of sense when I first heard the Worbli vision that they would be pursuing an independent sister chain. And I gotta say, I'm delighted that they have cherry-picked, it seems to me, some of the best block producers from the mainnet space to also make blocks for them. So I think they're very well served by that. That's one of the things I think the ecosystem is doing nicely, is it's surfacing these teams who are really hardworking, really smart, really trustworthy. And it's a chance you to see people in action, and they're kind of auditioning in a way. That makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. So you're not you're a governance guy. This is when you live, eat, breathe governance. The fact that these guys weren't elected, that doesn't bother you?
Say one more time again.
The fact that the block producers for Worbli weren't necessarily elected, that doesn't bother you?
That's a design decision. I've been immersing myself in an even more deep study of governance since I left Block.one. I've been reading Carver Policy Governance. I've just ordered a copy of The Calculus of Consent, which is a groundbreaking book from, I think, the 60s or 70s that I'm shocked I hadn't already read. And there's a lot of open space for design approaches around things like who should be block producers. Now, the downside of hand-picked block producers is who did the hand-picking, and under what circumstances do they then hold their block producer status? Are they like Supreme Court judges that are appointed for life, and then they're independent, and you couldn't hurt them if you tried? So they don't have an incentive to suck up to whoever appointed them. One of the criticisms, for instance, of Hyperledger, IBM Hyperledger, Hyperledger Fabric, is that those corporate chains, typically the block producers are all picked and controlled by one entity, in which case you don't need a 51% attack, you got a 100% attack. If IBM says, yeah, that block doesn't say that, it says this other thing, you're like, who's to say otherwise? The block producers are all getting paid by that person. They're going to salute and say yes or be replaced, which I think limits the amount of trust any individual marketplace participant can have. And what we're getting into is a challenge that was articulated by, I think it was Chris Cook, in something he wrote for the P2P Foundation called Market 3.0. And his point was that, way back when in early history, we would trade face-to-face, Market 1.0. And you trade with people you know, or people you could get to know, or people who had a reputation with people you knew. That's great. And then we could expand that Market 2.0 with nation-state control of markets, because you had law enforcement, you had a set of rules that were enforced by the courts for property and contract. But the 3.0 has been elusive, because to get into international trading, it's actually much harder than it seems. And no one nation state can hold that space. And creating an international trade association, either you lack liquidity, or whoever provides the liquidity ends up controlling and taking and being a rent seeker and sucking up all the profits as a fat middleman. And there's no clear way, as of the time he was writing, which was pre-Ethereum days, there was no obvious way to build a network where it would be run for the benefit of the users. And what I foresee is the possibility of using smart contracts and an EOS-like approach to build a marketplace for a specific thing. I don't know, commodities, drugs, prescription drugs,
Of course.
logistics services, whatever, where the block producers are controlled by the collective ownership of the market participants. Because what Cook said is the challenge is to prove that the market is being run for the benefit of the participants. And for that, you need a virtual middleman, not a real middleman. The virtual middleman is this emergent, governed entity owned by, run by, delegated to from these market participants. And I think blockchain is going to be able to do that. And I think Worbli may be able to do that for finance.
You think about the fact that it could potentially be a fiat gateways and just providing easy access into crypto, into the ecosystem, and they're out. You know what I mean? Like Worbli as a means to a fiat gateway. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I've heard the phrase fiat gateway used for a bunch of different offers. So I don't know exactly how it will play out when they go live and when it's operating at scale. I know that there's certainly going to be a lot of demand for easier fiat to crypto transitions. I have a Kraken account, and that wasn't the easiest thing in the world. And I promise you, my volumes are not very high. And if they were, I'm not sure how I get my needs met. What do I have to have an account on every exchange under the sun and try to slice it up and put it, a piece through everybody? That'd be messy. So I think that the maturation of this integration between traditional finance and crypto technology needs a bunch of experiments, very much like Worbli, to see how we can make it work. And so that's part of why I'm excited that they're doing that. I wish them so much luck and good fortune.
What do you think about the, because they've kind of, there's been some people in the community, the hardcore people who are, decentralization is the only way. And I'm a huge fan of decentralization myself. Don't get me wrong. I love EOS. I'm an EOS holder. I always will be. But in this particular case, I know that they have kind of a roadmap. They start off centralized, as we just talked about, and then over the course of 2 years, they plan on decentralizing. What would you say to those people?
Well, if you think you have a better way, go build it. Decentralization is a key concept. It's not the only one. It's crucial. The question is, how much decentralization do you need for your use case? And then how do you guarantee it? And how does this word decentralization manifest in different contexts? I had one person, I've read this several times, that mainnet EOS arbitration is, centralized. And I'm like, no, it's not. You've got one organization called ECAF with multiple arbitrators who can replace each other if necessary. And you've got disputants who don't even have to go to ECAF if they don't want to. They can pick any other venue on the planet and agree to disagree over there. And so if the word decentralization is only, if the bar is so high, it's only met when arbitration is performed by some disembodied cloud of arbitrator particles in low Earth orbit or something, like that's the only way. What do you want? Of course, you've got a dispute with two parties, at least, and an arbitrator. And none of them is decentralized. They're people. You don't split them into pieces. Okay, but you've got multiple cases that can each follow a different path. Okay, that's decentralization in that sort of an instance. And that's very different from, how do blocks get confirmed? People don't realize that there's a semantic and a syntactic layer to, for lack of a better term, in blockchain. At the syntax layer, you're saying, is this block done? Does it have its signatures? Is it confirmed by 15 block producers? Is it final, yes or no? And if the answer is final, then you're done. But semantically, you're saying, what does that mean? What does the contents in that block actually mean to me as a person? And so you can have an immutable block with a transaction that's just wrong because you fat-fingered something and you sent the wrong amount to somebody. And they're like, send it back. Like, yeah, okay, fine. And so they put in another transaction that sends money back. Well, did you just you just destroyed finality? No, that's a stupid question. You've got a new block with a new transaction that moves money back the other direction because you both agreed to it. In people's minds, like, don't want to work on two levels. It's too much for some people, but you're going to have to understand this stuff. Okay, so then instead, I send you the money by mistake, and we live in a regime where you're legally obliged to send it back to me, let's say, and then you don't. And then we get an arbitrator involved. Maybe it's ECAF, maybe it's not, who knows, and they order it returned, and you resist. And so the block producers enter a transaction that's identical to the one you would have entered if you were cooperative, and 15 of them sign it, and then the tokens come back as a new transaction in a new block correcting the old transaction. Okay, still immutable at the syntax level, but at the level of the business meaning of things, the money is moved back to where it should be from a human or business perspective. And people hear that like, oh, you've just destroyed immutability. It's like, no, we might have destroyed your ability to think, but we haven't destroyed immutability. So people aren't used to that kind of thinking because in old blockchains, version 1 blockchains, Bitcoin, there are no corrections. There is no arbitration. There is no business meaning of anything. It's just syntactic. If you have semantics, they're off-chain. And we're actually moving the business logic on-chain, which I think is a huge improvement, and it opens the door to a lot of really interesting use cases, a lot of interesting business cases, the ability to recover from the DAO, the ability to recover from one of the parity wallet failures, things like that, which, if you want to run on Ethereum or Bitcoin, you are one bug away from bankruptcy with your business.
Yes, you
And
are. Yeah, you are. I would.
good flippin' luck. The fact that parody is still in business after all these years is amazing to me. And I'm not saying that they're bad people. I'm saying that when you see how cutting edge they've been and some of the unfortunate bugs that have occurred and how much money's been lost and so on, the fact that people still have faith in them is a little. I guess they must be a really good team that people still are willing to work with them. But if they were held legally liable for losses, they'd be broken out of business.
100%. I have to agree with you there, my friend. What about the whole? I want to know what your thoughts are, and I think a lot of other people incorporating AML KYC with blockchain. What are your
Well,
thoughts?
let's just say that KYC and AML are, they're products of the corporate nation state. They're products of traditional banking, and they are mandatory if you want to work in that space, and they're optional if you don't. I haven't KYC'd. I don't know if you have, but we can set each other tokens right now, and no one can stop us. We don't need any nation's permission or anything else. Now, if we want to then interact with fiat and pull that money into a bank and turn it into dollars, I'm probably going to have to play their game. And so, for as long as we are on this interface between, blockchain-based cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies, you're working with banks, you're going to play that game at some point, or somebody is. Now, when you get vendors who are so completely on the blockchain that they don't care about banks, that they can get all their needs met with crypto transactions somehow, and neither their suppliers nor their vendors need to KYC AML, which means they don't either, then I can just transact in one or more cryptocurrencies and literally get all my needs met. We won't need that anymore, but we will still need some form of identity or pseudo identity. Not that we need to know who you are particularly. I actually don't care who you are. I care whether I have recourse. And that's where people get confused. They think that identity means figuring out, who Fred Jones is. And ultimately, I actually don't care who Fred Jones is. I just care if is Fred Jones good for his obligations? Is there insurance on Fred Jones? Is Fred Jones's business partners or his fellow guild members, or is someone going to stand up for his obligations to me so that I'm made whole? And if the answer is yes, I don't care if Fred Jones is a bot. I don't. I just care if I'm gonna get my needs met.
For sure. You spoke about something a little bit earlier, which is one of my pet peeves. Like, in order for me to be able to get into crypto and be able to get fiat into the system, into the gateway, so I can buy my YOS, I spend an arm and a leg, and I'm going to go through like 3 different processes, and then I've got to wait for whatever. I've got to wait like 15, 20 minutes more just to be able to get these transactions, and then try taking it out. Try taking money out, and like the fees and the madness and everything that I have to go through is ridiculous. And that's personally one of the reasons why I like the prospect of what Worbli is doing. I think that progressive thinkers, I know that sounds crazy because there's a lot of crazy people in crypto too, but I think progressive thinkers,
and outside, but yes,
right? Yeah, I think progressive thinkers understand that cryptocurrencies is the way of the future. But I don't think we're going to be able to pull people into crypto until we can finally say your assets are safe. You know what I mean? Your assets are insured. That's one of the things that.
Yeah. No one's going to voluntarily put their money at more risk than they need to. And I mean, seriously, when you look at the number of hacks in traditional crypto, the difficulty of securing keys, the incredible responsibility of securing keys. I mean, I'm not saying you may say people should be different than they are. You go play that game on your own. You can should your way all the day into a corner. Go with what is. And what is people go where they feel safe and they've got a certain level of guarantee. whatever that level is. And if you want wider spread adoption, you make the user experience easier. You figure out some way to fix the incredible challenges of key management. Stop calling them wallets; they're key rings. Okay, you're not moving money into your wallet. The money never leaves the ledger. It just gets associated with a different key or address. Right? When I finally figured that out after about 2 months of reading crypto stuff, I'm like, can we please stop talking about it wrong? And the answer is no, we cannot stop because it's been done too long. But I don't have to do it that way. Right? So your EOS never leave the EOS mainnet. Your EOS tokens are always there. It's just which account are they associated with? And what key controls that account? So key management, user onboarding, user experience, compelling applications, a sense of safety, some guarantees to make people whole, insurance, self-insurance if necessary, good reputation. Like one of the exchanges a while ago got hacked, and they were profitable enough that they could literally replace all of the stolen money themselves. It's like, it's our fault, we will make you whole. And you can imagine what that did for their customer loyalty. And it's like you can't buy enough ads to shift people's perception of you as much as that shifts perception of you. It's like Bayer aspirin when there was, or Tylenol rather, when it was tampered with, and they just said, pull it all. It's like, but we know that a lot of it's not tainted. It's like, customers don't trust it. I don't trust it. We're not putting it out without tamper-resistant bottles. Go fix the packaging. We are not shipping anything that we can't vouch for. Pull it. And they took a massive financial hit at the time. And everyone, all the bean counters and traditional business people are like, "Oh, it's terrible. Why are you doing this? It's fire that CEO." Years later, everyone realizes it's the most brilliant thing because he demonstrated that he valued the customer more than he valued money. It's like, okay, I want to be a customer for somebody who will put me ahead of, at least certain expenses. So the ability to demonstrate that your needs as a customer will be held highly, that I can either give you a safe experience or I will make you whole again if you don't, or I'll at least indemnify you to some extent. I mean, people are looking for that. We look for it off-chain. Why wouldn't we look for it on-chain? Of course we do.
Yeah, and I think Worbli has a potential to supply that. I'm insured crypto assets. You can just put your stuff on. You don't have to stress about it. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about somebody putting a keylogger into your account and stealing your stuff. I think that it's needed. I think it's needed to really get the masses into crypto. There's no doubt in my mind that crypto is heading mainstream. But if we don't have the right safety functions, if we don't have the right parameters to make it all happen, and we don't have a simple user interface that just clicks on, okay, beyond to cryptocurrency or electronic assets, whatever you want to. I don't think people are going to buy into it, man. So it's one of the reasons why I'm kind of excited about what they have going on. I guess in a matter of staying objective, what do you think some of their battles might be? Where do you see where do you see some of the things they're really going to have to nail in order to make this system efficient and make it run smoothly?
I'm going to put on my user hat and say what I'd like to see if I were going to try them on. And I'm likely to, right? I'm very likely to put, a couple hundred or even a few $1,000s into a Worbli account just to try it out, right? Then there's going to be a lot of people who will do that. We won't put our lives in there, but we'll put a few in. I think that's well, let me back up. We know from just the general literature of, how people adopt new technologies. The diffusion of innovation is a classic on that topic. That you've got the early adopters, folks like us. We're cutting edge people. Like, oh, look, it's a new coin. I don't recognize anything about it. I'll buy some. It's like, what? oh, here's a new exchange. I'll throw some of my tokens over there. It's like, why are you doing this? It's because this is how we learn things, and we're adventuresome, and we're courageous to the point of foolhardy, and this is how we learn. We try things out, and I promise you, we are that way in some areas, but we're not that way in everything. And some people are much less that way. We often say, grandma, but there are adventuresome grandmothers as well. As we age, we get less adventuresome. But that incredibly adventurous, try anything, they're not enough to build a mainstream business on, ever. What they are is your earliest cash flow, but they are sometimes not your best customers for designing a customer experience, because they'll put up with all kinds of crap that normal people won't put up with. So at some point, you've got to expand beyond those early adopters and stop listening to them and say, what would somebody who doesn't even understand crypto and doesn't even want crypto, but they just want a certain kind of behavior from a system, what would that person want, and how do we create a customer journey for them? And I would, if I were designing it myself, I would say one use case, a compelling use case with no good answer out in the real world today. Maybe something there's not enough margin when taking a traditional approach, but crypto can somehow have much more margin, whatever that means. Cross-border settlement maybe, or something. And find that use case and nail it, and make the user experience so beautiful and so easy and so safe that it just takes off. And I'm being vague here because I don't have an example for you. I don't know the financial banking space well enough. But I see every possibility of Worbli or a Worbli-like solution doing very, very well. We know that the third world is full of people who can't access bank accounts, but they do have smartphones. There's like apparently 1 billion people who fit that category. That's a large number.
Well.
If you can provide basic bank-like services for some, well-defined subset of them, like all of the, speakers of some language in some geography, like narrow it down and you just nail it for them. And then extend to like a second language or a second geography. To me, that is, maybe that's too traditional, but to me, that's how you tighten up the learning cycle enough to advance rapidly enough to start to make a difference.
Yeah, they've also got some kind of neat investing opportunities that were kind of previously only available to commercial investors. One of those things is going to be, of course, the insurance aspect, to be able to invest in insurance bonds, and also the ability to insure a lot of people who are kind of uninsurable right now because insurance just doesn't really understand the crypto space. Like BPs, for example, require some liability insurance, and I know they've been having a heck of a time getting that done. So I think it's, I think it's cool. If it's successful, what do you think it'll do? What do you think it'll do for the space or crypto in general?
My sense is that the world is on the brink of widespread adoption, and it is limited by use cases and user experiences. And whether it's Worbli or somebody else, whoever cracks that and is the first, try to imagine like there's this dam and water is trying to get past the dam. It's trying to go around the left side, trying to go on the right side, trying to get under it. And it's all these little tendrils working their way through the earth. And one of them's going to make it through. The one that makes it through is going to get big fast. And eventually that dam's going to blow. So I don't want to predict who it's going to be, but I predict it'll be something small and insignificant, and you'll look back at it and say, oh, it was so obvious. No, it was not obvious. And whoever does it is going to have just an insanely relentless attention to detail. They're going to have to be masters of their domain, and they're going to have to really take the user experience extremely seriously, and they're going to have to do something breakthrough on key management. That's my prediction.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. I love it. Makes sense, man. That's a really good way to describing it. I think for me, it's the fact that people keep hearing about these cryptocurrency hacks. Like I'm going to get my private key stolen. People kind of keep getting screwed.
Scares me too.
And if they can provide a place where you can actually insure your assets and they manage your key in the ways that you're talking about, I think it's going to be really, really good. Do people have to be scared of something like this? Do EOS holders have to be worried about something like this, or it'll enhance?
I'm a big fan of Tassim Nicholas Taleb. He wrote The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile and Skin of the Game, books like that. And he points out that the great test of anything is time. There's something called the Lindy factor, that if a show has been playing on Broadway for 3 weeks, it'll probably play for 3 more weeks. If it's been playing for 3 years, it'll probably play for 3 more years. And it's just this weird phenomenon that the longer it's been there, the longer it's likely to stay there. And that things that have stood the test of time will probably continue to stand the test of time. So we literally can't know, so we shouldn't try to know. What you should do is do your best and spread your bets and look for the thing that makes you unique and get really good at it. And be robust or be anti-fragile, whatever that means for your industry. There are a lot of early banks, 1800s. They printed their own banknotes. I mean, that's Wild West stuff. I don't know anybody that studied that who's published anything that's accessible to crypto people to harvest lessons from what it was like to create your own bank, create your own banknote. But we do that in crypto every day. But there've got to be lessons in that from that time frame, if only we could find them. I can't even guess what those lessons would be. But I think it's sort of sad that humans have been down this path at least a couple times before. But sitting here on the video call with you, I don't know where to find those lessons. I don't know anybody who was alive in 1850 who could who could tell me. So I don't know.
I look forward to seeing the project unfold. I guess there's a lot of people who kind of have that skepticism about Worbli. Not a lot of people. There's a small percentage of people. I'm noticing a lot more people get turned out of the project who just have that kind of skepticism and view them as kind of a corporate banking replicate on EOS. But in my opinion, for us to hit mass adoption, it's almost a bit of a necessity. People aren't going to play ball unless we provide.
Yeah, I don't know that you have to replicate all of the trappings of corporate banking. When I look at something like, I gave a lecture at Harvard. I love saying that. It sounds so sexy. I was invited to Harvard to give a lecture on blockchain. It's true.
Nice.
I have photos. And while I was there, I got to listen to Clayton Masterson. Is that the right name? No, that doesn't sound right. I'll give you the right name in just a second. Clayton Christensen.
Yep. Sure.
He wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, Innovator's Solution, and a few others. And one of the things he talked about in the lecture he gave that I attended is that the competitor that's going to disrupt you is not going to go after your core customer. They're going to go after the marginal customers that you don't even like very much, that you can't make very much money from, who you can't really serve very well. And they're going to go take those customers away from you. So imagine concentric circles. You've got the high margin, big dollar SUV, right? And that's Michigan-based car makers love making big, expensive SUVs at a big ticket price. They make a lot of money on those. And then they've got sedans. They've got these little midget, econo cars. And they can't make money on those. They're required to make them by law for the CAFE standard, but they don't like making them. They don't sell very many. And if someone took all their sales on that, they wouldn't even notice. They'd be like, oh, thank God someone else is taking care of those customers, but they're a pain in the ass. And the person who can solve that will eventually come along and eat their lunch at SUVs. But they'll go and get strong out in the wilderness. And so for banking, the last thing you want to do is replicate big banks and go after big banks' most profitable core customers. The way the innovation is going to show up, if it follows the Clayton Christensen pattern, is you're going to find some group that isn't well served by anybody, and you'll make a special thing for them that they can't get anywhere else, and they'll start building new businesses on top of whatever the thing is you just gave them. He gave an example of this extremely inexpensive refrigerator that doesn't use traditional compressors. It uses this weird, like bizarre physics property cooling that uses a different level of energy and different parts, and it's cheap as heck to make and highly durable, highly reliable. And some company started making small refrigerators based on this technology for India, and they were cheap, and people started buying them, and then they started saying, hey, I could sell cold drinks out of this icebox in my little village, and no one's had cold drinks before, and now I've got a little profit center. Oh, I can refrigerate meat. I couldn't refrigerate before. And they start building businesses that require refrigeration. There's a lot of businesses that require refrigeration, but they weren't even possible in these jurisdictions because traditional refrigeration was inaccessible. It was too expensive. And so what you see is like these little core economic value adds that you then build other things on. And I have to think, my friend, that banking is pretty foundational. And there's going to be an explosion of interesting and innovative and business creating and wealth creating and profit creating and prosperity creating innovation, building on top of something as fundamental as affordable, inexpensive, blockchain-based banking for the poor. And what that will look like, not the faintest clue, but it's going to be cool.
I have to agree, man. I have to agree. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm hoping that Worbli is going to be the one who pulls it off.
Well, they certainly seem well positioned. I'm not aware of anybody else doing what they're doing.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
And I have to say, I like the team.
100%. As do I. As do I. I've had the pleasure of doing a little bit of work with them. I think I did one of Dominic's first interviews, and that's when it kind of first captured my attention. And I've been just intently kind of watching the project ever since. So I think it's going to be cool. I think it's going to be another really, really, really neat kind of storyline to follow over the next coming months. And I just want to say thank you so much for spending a little bit of time chatting with me today about Worbli.
Absolutely.
It's always a pleasure. I'm going to make sure that people keep an eye on the Strong Block Ultra Secretive website and wait for something to immerse there, because
something somewhere somehow will come out, and boy, will it be cool.
I know. I'm looking forward to it, Thomas. And I'm definitely going to link to some of your Telegram channels in the EOS Alliance. And I also encourage anybody who is out there and who's doing some EOS journalism and some EOS media to come and get a hold of you. You have stated once again that you will talk to me. So.
I'll talk to any reporter. I'll talk to any interviewer, any podcaster, any web.
And I'm proof.
Yep.
Thanks so much.
Might not talk to you twice, but I'll talk to you once.
Everybody, thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.